Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, Novartis people. Hello, outer audience. Thank you all for joining us. This is our 5th episode of The Records, organized by us, Galen Growth, and Biome Novartis. And also this time we are broadcasting live from Biome Lab Space here at Mapletree. Today's topic, digital health partnerships, theatrics, or fit for purpose. It's of paramount importance because it showcases how far, how deep into digital health we have gone, but also the quality of these engagements. Indeed, today's session revolves around partnerships, how successful pharma companies have been in adopting digital health solutions, and what else can we do to move ahead. In addition, we are going to hear from a digital health venture founder who has already and successfully navigated the waters of partnerships with 2 major and global pharma companies. What's the base of today's session? Recently, Galen Growth has conducted a research on the top 25 pharma companies by assessing their digital health portfolio. And indeed today, I am joined by my colleague, Sarah Schmachtenberg, who is also our head of data and analytics for Europe and US, live from Switzerland, who will share with us all the details of the research and the key insights. And that is also going to be the starting point of the conversation with my panelists today. Therefore, before I give the stage to Sarah, I would like to ask my panelists to do a quick round of introductions. Let's start with,
Sure, thanks, Anna. So hi, Novartis folks, and hi, everyone else on the call. I'm Christian, and I lead the Novartis Biome for APMA. So the Biome, of course, is our digital innovation lab for the region. What we try to do here is essentially create digital health partnerships and make this work across our different regions. So very happy to be here, and I'm going to pass the mic to the other Chris on this panel.
Thanks, Christian. So my name is Chris Wilmot. I'm part of the Roche organization, and I'm one of our customer transformation leaders. I lead a large technical global program at the moment. From a business perspective, we're really trying to shift this notion of being technology-led, business-justified, customer-imposed to be customer-led, business-driven, technology-enabled, and so that's really opened our eyes up to innovation and how we can have an impact beyond our business.
Well, thanks, Chris. And so my name is Indranil. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Docquity. Docquity, in a sense, is really a network. It's a network of doctors, patients, and the healthcare enterprises. And the real objective as to what we are really trying to do is to bring together the real stakeholders of this, the healthcare ecosystem, to be able to drive insights and use those insights to start really building, solutions. And we talk about solutions such as the access, awareness, adherence, and affordability. And that's what, Docquity is all about. I'm happy to talk about this more in the panel.
That's great. Thank you so much for the introduction, guys, and looking forward to our conversation. In the meantime, hold on, and the stage is all for Sarah.
Thank you very much, Anna. And I'm going to ask Melvin if he could share the presentation because my button says only meeting organizers can share. So if he can share the presentation, that would be fantastic. I put it in Slack. In the meantime, let me tell you a little bit about the motivation. So Galen Growth did a study on partnerships between pharma companies, pharma biotech companies, and digital health ventures. The reason we did that is because, as Chris just mentioned, there's a big transition, and we've seen all of our clients have gone through reorganization. And really, it's the maturing of the digital health space. You guys know digital health isn't new; it's been around for a while, and now it's really maturing. And pharma companies, biotechs are transitioning to be really focused or to have a mature strategy in this area right? It's no longer let's try some things and see what happens. It's really, we know what's going on now. We're going to put a solid strategy in place and make this happen. And so that's why we did a portfolio analysis of the top 25 most active pharma biotech companies in this globally, right? And these are only global players. We kept the regional players out of it because they act a bit differently. And doing this portfolio analysis, then we can understand which pharma companies, you know, how they're treating digital health, right? Are they being more risky with their portfolio? Are they having a little bit less risk with their portfolio? And we can help them then understand going forward how to reshape their portfolio if needed. They probably can see that themselves in order to make sure that that the partnerships that they're forming and their digital health strategy is successful. All right, great. Let's see. So that's why we call it partnerships, theatrics, or fit for purpose. We don't mean to be mean with the theatrics. It's just understanding that in the past, perhaps it hasn't been such a cohesive strategy, and moving forward, we need to do things differently. The bar chart is showing you on the right is showing you then the growth of digital health ventures. As you all know, with the maturing of digital health ventures, it's also the growth is slowing slightly, and that's because the older ventures, the more mature ventures, are taking up more space, right? They're capturing a larger part of the market, and therefore there's less space for new ventures to come in, but there's still a 5-year CAGR of around 9% in digital health, right? So this explosion that we saw of digital health ventures has slowed down, but the influx of venture capital is growing. And you can see that in the ecosystem reports that we've published. Right, the pandemic, of course, disrupted the market, and pharma companies are adapting, and they're building their digital health strategies. Now, Melvin, if you can go, or if we can go to the next page, then you can see that we focus on the top 25 because they have 70% of the digital health partnerships globally. There's a huge concentration of partnerships, right, and those are the bars, the green bars, are each of the pharma companies that we looked at. We looked at 330 pharma companies, and you can see all the partnering is really concentrated in the spike on the left. It's a Pareto. So total, we have 1,105 partnerships, right? And 223 pharma biotech partners is what we looked at, right? And only the top 30 most active PharmaCOs have more than 5 partnerships in digital health, right? So it's a really concentrated market, and that's why it was useful to do the portfolio analysis. The innovation index, what we called, is built. Yep, on the next slide, is built looking at 2 different axes. One is the strategic fit of the portfolio, right? And that's looking at the pharmaceutical company, looking at their strategic areas, therapeutic focus areas, understanding their business and saying, does their portfolio of ventures fit into their business? Have they really integrated this strategy into the whole business, right? Are they covering, first of all, are they looking globally, right? Because these are all global pharma companies. Are the partnerships developed in the relevant therapeutic focus areas? Because as we talk to our clients, it's very clear that they're very passionate about the areas, the therapeutic focus areas they're working in, and ventures also have that passion, right, in a particular area. So if you match them up properly with the therapeutic focus area alignment, then you tend to see more success. You can go across and build solutions in other areas. It's absolutely possible, but we see the highest success when the passion for one particular therapy is matched. The third point in the strategic fit is digital health broadly integrated across the value chain at the pharma company? That means, is it being integrated into the research? Is it being integrated into, clinical trials, as well as treatment, diagnosis, right? You have a whole spectrum of areas where digital health can be implemented. And we want to know, is the pharma company really using the full potential? And finally, the number of partnerships relative to company size. Of course, if it's a large pharma company and they only have 5 digital health partnerships, then there's perhaps maybe there's some untapped potential. Let's say that. So that's strategic fit, and that'll be plotted on the vertical axis, and the venture score. That's the venture portfolio, looking at the entire portfolio of ventures of these pharma companies, understanding, did they choose strong ventures, right? Is there a strong leadership team in the ventures, right? What does the venture maturity look like? Do the ventures have significant market momentum? Do they have financial strength? Are they relevant in the markets they're in? Are they innovative companies, right? And it's just understanding there's a broad breadth of maturity of ventures or digital health ventures. That we all know that, and that's okay. But in order to really be successful and bring a product to the market quickly or efficiently, then you need to partner with the right ventures, with strong ventures that have strong leadership teams. Okay, so let's look at then distribution of the top 25 companies. Everyone looks for their name. Roche is on the very top when it comes to strategic fit. However, they go just south of average on the venture portfolio score. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Novartis is sitting actually in the optimal quadrant. We see Novartis, the portfolio has quite good strategic fit. They have, Roche has the largest portfolio, Novartis, second largest, very close as far as the number of digital health ventures that are included in the portfolio. And Novartis tends to go a little bit less risky with their portfolio choice. So the optimal quadrant up on the top right currently includes 6 pharma companies, and they're the ones we see are well aligned on both axes, right? Roche sits in the risky quadrant, and that we call it risky because they have good strategic fit, but oftentimes they're partnering with ventures that perhaps aren't as mature, right? And as long as they know that they're going to have to perhaps add more support, or it's going to take longer for that venture to get a product to market, right? It's not necessarily, it can be their strategy, right, to choose younger ventures, but what we see is it's more risky. You have a lower chance of success in that particular partnership. The rethink module quadrant on the bottom left is where we see that there's significant restructuring of the portfolio needed, right? Here, there's a lower strategic fit and as well a choice of much riskier ventures. And finally, the misaligned quadrant on the lower right is where we see that, or it can be characterized by low strategic fit, right? The pharma companies not having, well, what we consider not having the proper strategic fit between their venture portfolio and their corporate initiatives, right? They need to really rethink how the ventures fit into their business and make sure they're choosing ventures that contribute across the value chain in their business. And not just go and grab high name or big name ventures or highly mature ventures that they know it's a great venture, they should be doing something with them, but maybe they don't exactly know how that's going to fit into their portfolio, right? So this is the index, the matrix that we see and how we see the top 25 ventures. Now we can jump into what you saw in the farthest upper right, what we consider the best in class, what is Eli Lilly. And that's because if you look at their portfolio, they're globally distributed, right? They have ventures, 51% of their ventures are in North America, which is a bit overweighted, but not bad. 36% of their ventures they're working with are in Asia Pacific and 13% in Europe. They don't have a good representation in the Middle East. So that's their weak point. But they do have ventures that fit 11 out of 12 links in the value chain. So going from as I mentioned before, research all the way into disease management types of focus products. And they have ventures in 4 out of their 5 key therapeutic areas. We didn't see any ventures that are really focusing on their therapeutic focus area of pain. right? And just some examples of ventures in their portfolio are given on the right. Right? They also have ventures in the mental health area and disease agnostic ventures. Okay, and the next one we can jump quickly into is Biogen. Oops. Go ahead to the next slide, please. Is Biogen, which you see in the dot in the lower left-hand corner, right, in the misaligned, what we consider misaligned. And that's because they only have 9 partnerships that they've developed. And you see 78% of those partnerships are in North America. So although it's a global biotech company, right, they're really only focused in North America and in Europe. They don't have any ventures from the Asia Pacific region. And in addition, they only cover 8 out of 12 links in the value chain, but they do cover their main therapeutic focus area of neurology. So that they do have. All right, so that's how we've looked at the ventures. And if we go to the next slide, there we go. We can wrap up just wrap up by saying, you know, I'm really interested in getting your feedback and understanding how you look at your portfolios, and discussing a little bit how you plan to change things going forward. Our analysis shows that really the fastest way to excel in digital health is to find the right partners. I think you know that by now. And those right partners means that they have aligned focus to your key therapeutic focus areas. There's a broad distribution of digital health solutions across the value chain. The cultural aspects of digital health are considered at a regional level, which means partnering with regional ventures. And you choose high potential ventures that are mature and have a very strong leadership team. You will all be receiving a copy of the Innovation Index report that will be published within the next 2 weeks. Okay, so Anna, with that, I will hand it back over to you, and I look forward to discussing.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It was crystal clear and very interesting, of course, to see a bit who stands where. So before we jump into the questions that we have prepared for today, I would like to collect maybe if there is any cold feedback from what Sarah shared. Were you expecting at least? Yeah, we have Chris here, but probably in Daniel it's not in the case. But yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I've got to say you've piqued my interest. We've seen a snippet of the data, and I'm really interested to dig into that a little bit more. I'm not going to pretend to say I have a full picture of Roche's partner portfolio view here today, but I can certainly share some of the sort of observations that I have coming from Roche. And, you know, I definitely see real value in this research. I see this as being an important path that we're all heading down, and so any kind of guidance and learning that we can derive from this to help that acceleration is going to be really important. So I'd say thank you to start off with. I'm not going to say I fully understand all of it, but you've piqued my interest, and I'm in to see what else I can find in it.
So yeah.
I don't know if just if you want to give a cold comment, otherwise we move to the question section.
No, and I must apologize for bouncing between the laptop and here.
He's of course the co-producer. So yeah.
No. I mean, I completely echo a lot of what Chris has mentioned, right? I mean, I think even beyond that, I would challenge some of the data points, right? For example, does it mean a good or bad thing if you have a small number of ventures that you work with versus a large number of ventures? Does it mean something if you shift towards one region or not? I would argue it's not a binary question, right? But over to you, Anna, for the discussion.
Fantastic. Okay, let's then dig deeper into the conversation, and I will still start with Novartis in this case. No, not just to put you on the spotlight, but to start with Novartis, since it was positioned in the best quadrant, let's say, so in the optimal in the optimal quadrant of the matrix. Supposedly, it means that Novartis' strategy in digital health, it's quite robust, right? So I would like to ask you a bit more on what is, the company's approach with digital health and how it also has evolved in the years.
Sure. Thanks, Anna. And I'll try my best. Right. I feel like the sun is in front of me.
Oh yeah.
So no. I mean, so at the biome, we have a 4-step process. So I think it's a combination of process and people, right? I mean, as the old adage goes. So from a process perspective, you have the onboarding of viable partners, and then you have you have the identification of partners, and then you have the onboarding of those partners. But more recently, and I think pertinently, would be the 3rd step, which is to pressure test those solutions. Right. I think for the scalable solutions that we have had, I mean, there's been a fair amount of piloting and testing of those concepts. And well, sometimes those pilots stretch beyond longer than they should, right? But I think exercising that due diligence has allowed us to make sure that for the handful of partners that we do work with, we're able to maximize that and scale, right? So that's the second part of it, which is how do we ensure that when we've identified a problem solution fit, we take that to product market fit, right? So I mean, there are plenty of innovation methodologies out there that address that. So I won't dive into business model innovation and things like that. But I think what's more pertinent is we have a vision of scale. So anything that is developed in one country has to be scalable by definition, right? So I think that model may change in the next few years, especially when you consider that sometimes innovation comes in the absence of abundance, right? You see it growing in places like rural parts of certain countries, and honestly, that is where some of the great innovation comes from, right? So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, Anna, I think it's a combination of the right combination of scale and tools to allow that, and also the right people to make it happen.
Same one to Rush, because we saw it was a bit at the border of the optimal. I would like to get to know a bit more on Rush's approach in leveraging digital health.
Super. So I did say to you before we jumped on this call, I find this a really tough question, right? Because, the scale and the scope of this question is really difficult to quantify, right? As a company, we invest more money into R&D every year than any other pharma company, and in fact, any other company in the world. And so, when I reflect a little bit on where we're sitting, I suspect the reason I can't quantifiably say this is that there probably is a slightly higher risk appetite given the amount that we invest into research and development. And of course, within that space, that's inclusive of digital health. And then, on top of that, I need to think about things like we've made partnerships and acquisitions with Foundation Medicine, Flatiron in the past, which were huge strategic partnerships that are, have a long lead time to deriving a real benefit, and that are really shifting the paradigm of how we treat patients and how we manage care in specific disease areas. So I'd say that they're great examples of really strategic and significant investment decisions that are coming from Roche. And then, of course, I also have experience with partnering locally with startups and much smaller, much less established companies. And that's a completely different kind of experience to maybe what I see within the overall company. So I made myself a couple of notes. What I would say is, in terms of my observations, I don't see a really consolidated approach towards digital health across all of our functions, across the different divisions within Roche and the different groups within Roche. And I do think, while you've put this under the pharma banner, when I think about Roche, part of our strength is really leveraging our position with both a diagnostics and a pharma business. Although that also are two different business models, and that creates some challenge. The second part was when we do partner closer to the market, so more regionally or even within an affiliate, my observation would be our level of maturity still has some room to grow. And so often a lot of the conversation, and you mentioned this, is really around the feasibility. We find partners and it's a conversation, could we do something? And we struggle to get to the should we do it, right? So is this going to be a viable venture together? Is there a business model? Will we get some sort of return that makes it sustainable or scalable, to your point? And then, I would say the final thing to maybe say is just that's reflected in the quality of some of our decision making as well. Maybe just the thoroughness of it. So there you go. I'll shut up on that point.
No, thank you very much, and I appreciate the fact that you have conducted your own research, to get to know to your own company. So no, thank you for the insight. Let's continue. Let's stay in the pharma stakeholder before jumping to the startup itself. Chris, Novartis in this case. You described a bit Novartis' approach with digital health. Would you be able to just summarize, let's say, the key success factors of this approach? You can also add a bit, not add, but maybe share a bit also on the role of Biome itself in leveraging or in penetrating the market or in launching these partnerships, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. And a slide that Sarah presented sort of comes to mind, right? I think there was this sort of like dichotomy of what it takes for a successful venture versus what has actually been done. And I mean, I would push the threshold on that a little bit. So I mean, everything that Sarah mentioned is absolutely true, right? You need, I think it was stated that you need the right configuration of a team. You need the right intention to fund or finance an open innovation venture. I think all that is well stated. But for us, I think one thing that comes to mind is the notion of centers of excellence, right? So, and that's, I'm sorry to use an awfully consulting term. It might be remnants of a bygone era here, but I think basically we have a lot of innovation teams working on the same projects, right? And for good reason, because as I said, problems start at a country level and then they sort of proliferate up, to the top management to go into products. So from that vantage point, how do we say we have 3 or 4 teams in different regions like India, Australia, and Singapore, right? Or even Korea, and say, what are the gaps and where are the trends that we see in a specific area? So it could be something like, let's say, AI diagnosis for heart failure, right? Or it could be diabetic retinopathy screening in rural areas, right? I mean, these are overarching themes that you see regardless of geography, right? So can we take those learnings and from different POCs or pilots and say, this is the direction that we're going to go. And then once you find that direction, commit to it, right? So I think that's on the internal part of the picture, which is, despite any existing boundaries or even, dare I say, bureaucracies that exist in an organization, how do you align? And that's through learning. And the second piece of the puzzle is the partner, right? So I'll be very frank, Anna, and say that not all our partners have worked out, right? I mean, sometimes even in a previous life in banking, you would find a partner and they would disappear in the middle of the night, right? And these are companies that would have been well funded early in their Series A or their Series B, and I don't blame them, right? Because it's hard to be an entrepreneur. But I think as an organization, we need to be ready and have that trust to work with these companies, right? So have that frank conversation with the partner to say, what's your roadmap in the next 5 years, right? Where's your vision? Of course, you're not going to ask, are you just hoping to sort of grow and sell your company, right? I mean, I think sometimes, the old-fashioned ways are important, right? So evaluate what are the values behind the founder, right? Why did you start this company, right? Why did you go into this to help patients, right? And I think that is very telling of where they're willing to go and how much you should invest as a company. And I think that's where we've seen a fair amount of success. And I would also add, at risk of sounding lengthy, I think it's also not about the size or the brand name of the company. Sometimes it makes more sense to work with a small company that has that hunger to scale than a large established company that is Series C funding, Series D funding, that may not be willing to move at the speed that you are, which is an interesting question because they're always saying that farmers, like large companies, are the ones without agility. Hey, it could work both ways, But I don't know. I feel like Chris has something to add to that.
I think you nailed an awful lot of that on the head, actually. I think when I reflect on Roche, we see a lot of innovation and a lot of focus on the opportunity to establish digital health partnerships or drive digital health innovation. But we've spent a lot of time looking across our organization the last couple of years. And when we did, we found a huge amount of duplication, right? A lot of different parts of the world trying to solve the same problems. And so when I look a bit at the sort of strategic transformation that Roche is going through at the moment, a couple of things really stand out. One is there is a very strong drive to becoming far, far more customer and patient-centric in our organization. And that serves a couple of really important points in my mind in this particular discussion. The second one is we're working really hard to become a much more networked organization, to have information flowing between different parts of our organization. And the purpose for those things are that we start identifying the big opportunities to have an impact. So immediately starting with scale in mind, right? Although not getting hampered by scale. And creating the network to be able to partner within our organization as much as it is outside of our organization. And I think that helps us to better identify better partners, because it might be that the right partner is not in Asia Pacific, despite the challenge existing in Asia Pacific, right? And so I think that helps us really to find much more customer-orientated, customer-centric problems, the ones worth solving for. And two, it helps us to build the connections, minimize duplication, and get the right minds, the right level of creativity, the right input into bringing the solution or developing the solution. And that's not just from an internal perspective, but an external perspective. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, no, thank you for the answer. It was quite comprehensive from both, actually. And I appreciate that you also shared what hasn't worked. So that's a good example to keep in mind, when starting such journeys. Leaving the what didn't work aside, let's focus. Let's explore more a bit of a successful story. We identified Indranil because you have already worked with Novartis and you have already in a partnership with them. And in an informal conversation, we also discovered that you are also already working with Roche. So spot on the example of today's discussion. You mentioned a bit at the beginning of what is Docquity. Let's dig a bit deeper on what pain points is your venture, of which you are co-founder and CEO, trying to solve.
Well, I think if you looked at the core, at a core, Docquity is really it's a network. It's a network of doctors, it's a network of patients, and it's a network of the healthcare enterprises. Now, I saw in the slide that Sarah presented, it was really around a lot of focus around individual therapeutic areas. And I think the approach that we took was really about how to go across therapeutic areas and being able to create this network which can really facilitate interactions between doctors, patients, and the healthcare enterprises, which includes the pharmas, to be able to drive some of these kind of insights. You mentioned about, Chris, patient centricity. And I think from the way we look at patient centricity is really about trying to understand what these doctors and what these patients are really wanting, what's on the ground. And I fundamentally believe that, a network or an interactive network is a place to really get and mine those kinds of insights. And the objective was to, where we were trying to look at, we had this broad goal of that, healthcare really has about 4 major areas to tap on, which is access, awareness, affordability, and adherence. But generally what we've seen is that we are looking at this at a very, very pinpointed approach when you're trying to solve one problem. And I think where Docquity is really trying to help is that, as a company, we might not be able to prepare all the solutions on our own, but by building this kind of a network and generating insights and working with partners like Novartis and Roche, you can actually start co-creating these kind of solutions. And that's exactly what we are trying to bring to the market. In fact, if you look at the journey we've had with Novartis, we started when we were a one-country network. And I think now we're across with these guys around 8 countries, and similarly with Roche as well. It's a couple of years partnership, and pretty proud to say, the slide that Sarah showed, a lot of these guys are actually our clients now. So yeah, so that's where we are actually heading towards.
That's great. Thank you for that. Let's continue a bit more on exploring how the journey with Novartis or Roche in this case, you pick one. Let's discover a bit more on what were the challenges during the path before actually reaching to a partnership. What lessons, what barriers you had to face or navigate or.
Yeah, I think I'll take the Novartis example just to kind of work through this. And I think the most important point for us to understand, we've been talking a lot about digital health, and digital always has a lot of buzz around it. But one of the most difficult things about digital is it's not just about digitizing operations, it's about driving tangible outcomes. And tangible outcomes when it comes to patient outcomes or even business outcomes, right? And I think one of the fundamental problems in the early stages of any of these companies to be able to prove the ROIs. And you really cannot prove ROIs if you do that on a very, very small scale. And I think that's where, I think the Novartis journey for us has been really useful because, we started like in one country, I think the Philippines, and we looked at one specific use case, which was about, how do we really change the way doctors are getting educated scientifically on multiple different areas. And from there, and the great part was, one story got replicated, as you mentioned, Chris, it got replicated, into a regional story. And then that also started to help us to understand even further use cases. You talked about one of the things which I would really love to see in that slide, in this research, Sarah, that you've done is how this is being distributed across the newer products, the established products, as well as the oncology kind of areas, because I think the partnerships differ in terms of use cases across these 3 different verticals and depends on the product evolution life cycle as well, right? So think about this, like we started with Novartis on that scientific education part, which was a core as a part of the network, moved to an area where we were able to identify or really starting to challenge, the traditional push model. We have to understand that, this is a model that has been existing over the last, a century, right? And to be able to disrupt that, it needed some kind of this effort coming in from the, the Novartis regional team, and I really appreciate that. And then goes to even to the newer topics, for example, on the patient access or the patient adherence side, where working with the Novartis oncology team, we were able to come out with, what Chris just mentioned about a patient-centric approach, like really taking a survey of breast cancer patients and thinking about, what those insights are. For example, one of the clear insights we got was for breast cancer patients, you have to include the husbands and the mental health aspect in the entire treatment journey, which was not really a direct patient journey that we were able to identify. And then from there, you start moving into, you started moving into things like figuring out and even, kind of creating a hybrid structure where digital is optimizing processes, but you still have a kind of a call center or something where the human interaction is still happening. And I think that's where this entire, the focus of the journey has been, is starting digital, starting small, to really experiment into the different use cases that can go into creating this hybrid model where digital and offline really are existing. So I think that's one of the core fundamental areas that what we have learned, and specifically in this entire journey.
That's for me, it's very fascinating to hear, because it puts together, of course, the human, impact and the technology. Because usually when we talk, for example, I'm taking just AI, right? There is this fear of AI taking over, the jobs. It's it's just a breaking news, title for media, but at the end, the conversation should shift and should be a bit more content and deeper, on what is actually affecting, impacting, how it is helping, and how the two will coexist, because that's, I think it's going to be the future, but this is what I personally believe. Okay, just staying a bit furthermore with Indranil, you already mentioned several difficulties, let's say, in starting, the journey with Novartis. what helped you move ahead? I'm basically, I would like to understand a bit more also on how the stakeholders, the corporate stakeholders were engaging with you, what they were putting into the table. So how, what was the level of openness also?
Well, I think from this aspect, and I'll be very clear. I think the support we've got from both Novartis and Roche, in terms of the actual creating champions internally, has been brilliant. For example, I think Christian, you mentioned about the country approach, and then the region, then it's getting scaled up to the regional side. So as I said, initially, I think the real reason why we have been able to kind of go from a country-based POC to a regional approach is because there was actually experience sharing across countries, and then regional taking a much more closer kind of a look where instead of now discussing this any kind of solution or the use cases that we are bringing to the market at a country level or a therapeutic area level, we have now got the support to be able to walk up to Christian and the team here and talk about this as to how do we start to scale this up across. So and that's not just around, I think, on the innovation side. We've also seen specifically this going into the procurement side of the business, and you move from a country procurement to a regional procurement, and the standardization of the MSAs, etc. It takes time. I think three years into the journey as well. So yeah, I think from that perspective, I think we have been lucky, I would believe, but that experience has that's really helped us to really navigate these kind of scenarios with the other clients as well.
Very, very true. It's like a learning curve, to be also scaled with the other partners. But also, I think you have also impacted the learning curve of the internal, corporate stakeholders, which is, I think, very. It's a critical success factor in this journey of partnerships. At least both me and Sarah talking with clients, we see, that also the level of readiness, the level of knowledge, from corporate partners, it's differs, let's say. Let's not use adjectives in this case, but differs quite a lot, So, okay, thank you for sharing your experience. Moving to the corporate stakeholder, let's understand a bit more on what type of partner, what are the key factors that Novartis, I'm going to ask the same also to Chris Wilmot for Roche. What are the key factors that you are looking for in a digital health in a digital health venture and future partner potentially?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. So I did speak a little bit about this earlier, right?
Sure.
So I think beyond the what we call hygiene, which is like when was your last funding, when was your last fundraising, or what series are you at? What's the technology maturity? I think those things are fairly established. But I'll go back to, I think, the broader question of what's in it for the startup to work with you, right? So from a cultural perspective, why Novartis as opposed to working with a Roche or as opposed to working with a Amgen, for example, right? I mean, is the intention to spread, like sow your seeds and then find that one corporate who will take you to where you want to go? Or is it that you have aligned with a therapeutic area? You see that the pharma has something to offer in terms of clinical expertise, medical knowledge, or more recently, even access to hospitals, right? You see that is the company for you, right? And then I say as a digital lead that, okay, let's start working, right? And I think that's the cultural bit. On the technical front, right? So I just got a question the other day from someone who assumed a digital lead role within my organization, right? And she said, Chris, what does a digital lead do? Right. So I kind of want to expand Anna's question beyond the startup.
Please, I'm
right?
curious now, please.
Well, what do I do? So, I think what I told her was you need to be an entrepreneur, right? So I'm going to flip the tables a bit and say that the corporate has to be an entrepreneur. And I'll tell you why, right? So even with Indranil, those processes that we talked about, creating expedited onboarding, right? That's not something that's going to happen overnight. That's something which you have to canvas and pitch for support internally from day one, right? So that's what I mean by being an entrepreneur, right? So you don't just have a startup founder. You have someone within the organization who's willing to fight for that idea. And you're going to single-handedly champion it. So you have a founder on the outside and you have a founder on the inside, right? Some people call that business building, right? But I mean, for me, it's much simpler. It's just prioritize 2 or 3 projects and then go for it, right? So I mean, to answer your question, and I think it's a combination. So basic hygiene, like company health, vision, operations, capital, that's done. Then you go to cultural capital. So, you know, what's in it for you? Where, right? So, you know, recently I started this thing called a health tech needs assessment, right? Because for the longest time, we were getting startups just, you know, reaching out, right? And they're asking, how can you help me? And we're asking back, how can we help you? Right? As you, Chris, sort of nodded. So yeah, you know, I think that's for me important, right? And it covers some of the things that I mentioned. I don't know, Chris.
I would say +1 to a lot of that, right? I think we're in a pretty similar situation. I think one of the reflections I'd have on this, though, is I think there's a process that we follow, and I think sometimes that process is different to the expectations that we have. And I'm kind of growing more and more conscious around, you know, when we have these discussions, or at least when I'm observing these discussions, as it is more the case, you know, trying to get much clearer on what are the expectations that we have internally so that we set partnerships up for success from the outset. Because I think often, just by virtue of where we've come as an industry, you know, we're used to partnering with big organizations that are well-oiled machines, or often not well-oiled machines, but hundreds of years of backing behind them and huge amounts of investment and resource. And then we expect the same kind of level of service from a smaller, you know, more nimble kind of startup or emerging digital health partner. And it doesn't set them up for success, and it doesn't set us up for success. And so, you know, for me, a lot more of my focus is how do we start to rethink, you know, establishing these partnerships and these relationships, and making sure that we're setting both partners up for success.
Inspiring, I would say. No, thanks for the clarification, and also where you stand, like the corporates player, where they stand, you know, in the journey of successfully starting a partnership with the digital health ventures. And I also personally like and appreciate the expectation keyword, which is one of the topics to be managed, you know, on both the sides. Not also managed, but first of all, to be clarified, you know, those objectives and those goals and that strategy and that vision that we talked at the beginning. Not just, as Sarah mentioned at the beginning, oh, we like that player, let's do something together, you know, without the clarity, you know, from the business corporate. Let's continue the conversation with the two of you by, you know, understanding a bit more on what are the future areas where both Novartis and Roche are going to focus going ahead, specifically, of course, in digital health.
Sure. So again, I keep using this word, but scale, right? So I mean, the biome, at least in APMA or Asia Pacific and MEA, this is our first year, right? Some of you might have joined the launch in February, right? So this year it was all about building a portfolio, right? So getting the teams in place, you know, getting them to work with the startups, creating an accelerated onboarding process and things like that. So that's all fine and well. But next year it's really about taking 2 out of 3 of those portfolio and basically making something out of it, right? So I'm not sure who mentioned it just now, but I heard the word patient outcomes, right? So the question becomes, how do you quantify or qualify what is successful out of this portfolio? So, I mean, you could use any number of consulting matrices, right? But for me, I prefer sort of the axis of ease of implementation versus level of impact, right? So the first one is self-explanatory, right? But the second one is really about patient outcomes. So for me, if you can create accelerated diagnosis, that's one. And the second thing is if you can create patient access, right? So a common question that's been asked to us recently is, you know, why are pharmas even interested in digital health, right? I mean, you guys are the ones making the treatments, right? And the clinicians prescribe the treatments. So why are you getting involved at all? And at risk of sounding a little ideological, right, idealistic, right? I say that it's because of the patients, right? I mean, if you can support the ecosystem to accelerate diagnosis, so the clinician ends up diagnosing a rare chronic disease at a much faster rate, everybody wins, right? If you're able to create access in a rural part of Vietnam and take that model to Australia the next day, everybody wins, right? So, I mean, I don't even see it as what some people say as a dichotomy, right? Like it's this or that, right? In fact, I kind of forgot the question. Oh, so next year, right? So yeah, I mean, in essence, it is about picking those 2 to 3. Just picking a matrix and running with it. There's no right or wrong because we're all, at least in Asia, I think Chris and I were just talking about this just now. It's a new game, right? First 2 to 3 years, just pick an objective and run towards it, and let's just see what happens, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought that was very well articulated. It's hard to follow you sometimes, Christian. What I would say from my perspective is, I think the first thing I'd say is I'm hugely passionate about Asia Pacific, right? And I think, as an area, this is a great place to innovate. There is an energy, a pace, an innovative spirit, and a current that runs through Asia Pacific that is, I find really difficult to discover in other parts of the world. And we talked a little bit about necessity being the mother of innovation. And I think there's no place where you can see that in real time more than parts of Asia Pacific. We see mobile technology completely leapfrogging infrastructure, shortcomings in all parts around us. And I just think that that's an inspiring and inciting place to work in. And so from a geographical perspective, where do I see innovation happening? I think Asia Pacific is the place to be. From a Roche perspective, we're starting to challenge a lot of our business model or business models and trying to create a lot more white space for innovation, rewriting the rule book and thinking really differently. And so I would probably say that we're open for business. We're keen to hear and understand. And then I think, understand what possibilities are out there to get inspired, help us to reimagine what could be. And then I think to your point, it's how do you find some focus in there and make some wise sort of strategic partnerships and bets moving forward. So that would be my point of view on that one.
Thank you, and happy to hear that there's lots of attention and focus on APAC, at least since we are in APAC. I mean, at least I am in APAC, so great piece of information. Thank you to both. I will close the set of questions with Indranil, and then we can open the Q&A from the audience. Indranil, the last question with you. What recommendation and suggestions would you have for startups willing to undertake a partnership with a major pharma? It's a wide question, I know. Where do you start it? Imagine you're talking to a fellow entrepreneur that is already talking with Christian Theo here.
No, well, I think first of all, I think we ourselves as a company, we also have to learn a lot more. It's just the starting of the journey as to where we are. We're probably just hitting some of the high level use cases right now before we really drill down, and you spoke about some of those use cases. But I think in any of the solution specific area that we are looking at, I think the most important thing, as you guys mentioned, was really about how are you measuring the outcomes? How are you measuring the ROI? When as a startup, and I'll be very, very frank, we were a small company when we started, and we looked at Novartis, as a multi-billion-dollar company, and you just don't know where to start. And I think the biggest the outcome that we were able to identify was really about being able to show in a smaller setup, what the value of Docquity was really, and that was what was needed to really, as you mentioned, those internal entrepreneurs, those internal champions that we were able to kind of generate within Novartis, and obviously that led to the expansion in the number of use cases. So I think fundamentally from my side, it's really about really focusing about, taking up a small use case and focusing on the ROI relentlessly, because we all talk about digital. Digital will never be adopted into a mainstream business until and unless it really drives business outcomes. And I think that's the fundamental aspect that we all need to drive. And second, be patient, right? It takes time. It takes time, especially in digital health. It takes time, I think. And it's not just about the pharmas. I think the investor community also needs to understand that digital health takes time. It's not crypto that's gonna just go, keep on going and showing that volatility. But I think personally, we are from the digital health and we are looking at the healthcare space. I think the healthcare space can really drive outcomes. And I think that's what any startup working with any of these companies should really focus on. What's the outcome? What's the ROI? More importantly, how are you measuring and showing it back? I think that's fundamental to creating any kind of partnership.
Thank you for that. I hope people listening took notes of of your suggestions. Thank you so much for playing with us and being also genuine, in your answers. I have a set of questions from the audience. So, and there are a lot actually this time, Chris. Let's try to cover them all. So I'm going to ask a bit of quick answers, straight to the point. Let's start with the first one, which is more on the pharma side, from Thomas. Are there any ventures that you see common across multiple pharma and medtech players? So
for both Chris's, right?
Whoever has the answers. Otherwise, we skip it.
What was the question again?
Do you see any ventures? Are there any ventures that you see common across multiple pharma and medtech players?
Do you see Chris pointing right at Indranil? No, so let me take a stab at two, right? And bearing in mind that we recently partnered with APAC Med, which is like the Medical Technology Association. I think that in itself shows the focus on hardware and software combinations, right? So AI diagnosis in clinical decision support, I would say is a huge theme, a theme that has not been cracked, right? So I'll be very honest and say that there's a huge area there in user experience that is awfully understated, right? Because there's a lot of emphasis on, let's create a great AI, right? Let's get clinical validity up to 99%, specificity, sensitivity, all these words getting thrown out, right? But nobody's stopping to say, if you think about Donald Norman's user experience principles, right? Is the physician going to use this interface, right? Is this going to be something that is, part of his user flow, right? And questions like that. So that's it. I think that's a huge area being explored. Another one is exactly right here. We have Indranil, right? So anything that focuses on bridging otherwise asynchronous flows of information between clinicians, pharma, and patients will be interesting and something to observe. I don't know if Chris, you have any.
All I'd add is, I think if you turn it around and you think about it from a customer perspective and you actually go to what are the use cases that, drive digital health kind of ideas or partnerships or ventures, there's hundreds of points of commonality across the pharma industry. And, we are in many instances trying to solve the same use cases in each different pharma company, if not in multiple instances within our own pharma company. So I would say absolutely yes.
Thank you for that. Going ahead, question from Andrian Rado. How do you balance cultural fit at regional level and ability to scale global geographies or across multiple therapeutic areas? Yeah, this is major indeed.
Man, you guys are.
Thank you for the audience, to the audience for the questions.
So the question was, how do you balance cultural fit between regional and global priorities?
Yeah.
The answer is you don't always have to balance it, right? That's from my perspective. Increasingly, and I'm 1 year into the job, right? Like I feel honestly that global and regional alignment isn't always important, right? Especially when you're talking about digital health solutions. So increasingly you find that in a portfolio of ideas, maybe maybe 3 out of 5 of them might be scalable across the region, right? But if you find something that is more specific to a single country, right, I think it is worth doing it from a bottom-up approach, right? And I myself have been party to that, right? So can you make global and cultural fit exist? I mean, honestly, that's a human factors question. I think it's even beyond the realm of this panel, right? Like it's human psychology, and going by anything in history, it's all about people relations and sociology, right? There's no easy way to say it, but you can try to build it, right? I don't know, this is an awfully conceptual answer, but I don't have the answers for that. You know?
No, I appreciate the abstract of it, of focusing just on the cultural side in terms of psychology, you know, just putting together different cultures in terms of ethnicities. But I think the question was more on the business itself, like, you know, regional objectives to probably a global vision.
I mean, for us,
thinking at the top and then executing at the regional level. How do these two, you know, combine together?
Oh, I mean, structurally,
together.
we have an organization called the Biome, right? So there are 15 of us across the planet, and each of us talk to each other around what's in the portfolio and what do we want to focus on every year, right? So of course there'll be 2 to 3 that we do focus on, but there are also projects outside of that we might entertain because we see potential beyond the portfolio.
Okay, thanks. Question for Chris of Rush from Kuntal. Could you share more on the vision with Flatiron?
Flatiron and personalized health. Wow. Okay. So really, I need kind of another conversation for that. Look, Roche's vision for personalized healthcare is to start to bring individual treatments to an individual diagnosis. And so that's really the future that Roche is looking at. How do we completely change the paradigm of how we treat things like cancer and take it down to much less of a subtype or a subgroup of patients and down to an individual level. So, and we do that using, you know, big data and advanced analytics. So.
Thank you. The next question, I think it's more for us, Sarah, would be interested in understanding from Oliver, would be interested in understanding more the impact generated in terms of quality with the different ventures. He's asking if that is part of the analysis, not for the moment, but it's a very interesting question and also difficult to actually discover, you know, the impact of the partnerships, basically. So Oliver, it's not covered in the research that Sarah shared because there are different challenges to be covered, and I think it requires a bit of an ad hoc approach, like portfolio assessment, you know, for the specific company, so that we have also access to, you know, to the people involved in that partnership, and so it's more of a due diligence approach. The next question is from Michelle Leong. What are the key qualities you look for in a partner? I think this was already covered during the conversation, so I'm going to skip it. Question from Robin. Would you recommend to start venturing from small scale hackathons versus finding partners, or is hackathon not sustainable today? How do you see the industry driving talent, such as employing gig generation? From my perspective, I think hackathons are a bit of an old approach, but this is just my answer. Please, over to you guys. Or Indranil in this case.
I don't feel qualified to answer that from my role.
Whoever has I mean, only if you have a position.
I do have a position, but it's outside of Novartis's position. It's from an open innovation perspective.
Okay, cool.
No, I don't think hackathons are always the answer. Right. I think sometimes it makes sense to have a more targeted approach, right? So recently we did something called a reverse pitch, which is putting Novartis in front of a bunch of startups and saying, do you want to solve our problems, right? I sometimes find that a little more useful than saying, all right, here are 5 problem statements, guys, you know, go figure it, right? And then pitch to us and we'll give you $10,000 to fix it. I think it works if you need quantity, but not always, you know.
Thank you. Sorry, I was reading.
That was a very opinionated response. So
Yeah, okay. It was not sponsored by Novartis.
It was
let's
not
clarify
sponsored by
it.
Novartis.
Okay, we have two questions from Daniel. I think these are for us, Sarah, regarding examples of other PharmaCOs digital portfolio. It would be interesting to understand the impact of any of these partnerships and the scalability. I think this is a bit more on the previous question, quality and, giving a quantity to the single, partnership. The next one is for Indranil, but I think you already answered that. Daniel is asking, since we have Docwity in the panel, it would be interesting to learn his experience on working with big pharmas, and I think we covered this. Going ahead, question from Oliver, following up on Daniel, would be interesting to hear Docwity's perspective on starting/onboarding with pharma companies. What are the pain points and the bottlenecks from the startup perspective? Also, this you almost answered. I don't know if you want to add something to this, or.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would like to add is, I think it's about the problem statement. I think coming back to that hackathon thing, rather than doing a hackathon and trying to figure out a solution, I think it's more important, for example, to really be able to understand the problem statement that you're solving. And just to take an example outside the pharma world, the way we really entered, when we really launched our application for the first time back in 2016, it took us about 8 months to get our first doctor to actually come on the platform. And the only way we were able to scale up was because of really being able to understand the problem statement that came from the medical associations, which was really around the online education aspect. And once we were able to identify that, and given that we were a tech company, we were really able to scale that up. But it took us about 6-8 months to get to that first user, and then to the medical associations who gave us that problem statement. So whether it's a startup or whether it's working with the pharmas, I think get to that problem statement as quickly as possible, because technology can be made. But yeah, so that's what we had.
Very true. Okay. Thank you for that. The questions are over. You can breathe now. We are 10 minutes past the hour, so I think it's time to close. I want to thank, first of all, my colleague, Sarah, for sharing the research. A big thank you to the panelists who shared all their experience with me in this case, with Sarah, and also the audience. And thank you to all the people who joined us today, who followed us, who shared questions with us, and who have become now fans of the records. So stay tuned, and we're going to organize something else very soon. Thank you so much, and have a nice day ahead.